business, the practice, the pursuit, the process, as we segue from where my colleague Reverend Wedderburn Ellis just left us. The process, as you should see on screen just now, just confirm that you're seeing the slide. Discipleship, the process. Yes.
Yes, we do.
All right, great, great. All right, so we're gonna move pretty quickly, um, just to say that for what we're gonna look at, if any individual, well, maybe not so much individual, but certainly at the level of the local churches or in the region, we can certainly look at a more fulsome engagement around this. But so discipleship, the process, and I want to start just there, that it is a process, and we can't underscore that enough. If for whatever reason in the next minute I'm out and we're not able to continue, I would want us to get that idea that it is a process. It is what we saw in the life and the ministry of Jesus Christ our Lord. Jesus himself literally understood discipleship to be a process. And very unfortunately, it is what he understood it as. It is what he did with the disciples. He made disciples through a process, and he committed those disciples to that process. They continued in and with that process. The early church was established in and around that process. And for about the first 3 centuries or so of church history, that was what it was understood to be. Unfortunately, and the shift gradually tends to be traced right back to the year AD 325 under Emperor Constantine, who, quote unquote, converted to Christianity. That's a moot point in church history classes. Converted to Christianity, and by edict declared the then world, the Roman Empire, and ostensibly the then known world, by virtue of the Roman Empire being the dominant power at the time, declared by edict everyone in his domain to be Christian. And so it moved away from a personal relationship, a personal decision, a personal relationship along a continuum where the new disciple was actively being discipled through a process, which we're going to look at, to one of status and of nationality and of proximity to power and all of that. And unfortunately, increasingly over time, that's what it has been. There was a bit of a stop of that digression with the Reformation of Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and their contemporaries. But again, perhaps it's the nature of life. Life tends to go in cycles. Again, over time, I certainly believe that the church finds herself in the postmodern era that we are now in need of another reformation, in need of being rescued from her own self. That too, we can have a wider discussion on. But that it is a process, and that it is not about an event, that where we have reduced it to a mere curriculum, a very short-lived curriculum, that we have to go back to a personal understanding, a personal commitment to, and a corporate commitment of an understanding of what Jesus had in mind when he established what we call the Great Commission. that making disciples is essential to fulfilling the Great Commission. That in fact the heart of the Great Commission, the imperative, the only imperative in that Matthew 28 text is in fact make disciples. Some have placed an inordinate focus on the baptizing. Some have placed an inordinate focus on the going. Some have placed an inordinate focus on the teaching. But that in fact, those are the aspects of, the elements of the imperative in the text, that of making disciples. And so the word of God leaves absolutely no question about the importance of discipleship. I think we are agreed on that. What we may not be agreed on is, well, what exactly is it? What does it look like? I hope we recall that this theme that the missionary church pursued some years ago for a number of years, I think at least 3 years, could be 4, under the tenure of the Christian Aid Directorship tenure of Sister Zoe Simpson. During that time, she served during that time. The Christian disciple, I think we had, and discipler, right? And so I want to just bring our minds back to that as we look at the process of disciple making. That is to say that we must fundamentally understand that being a disciple is the precursor. It is the preamble, right? It is a condition precedent to use that term from the finance sector. Being a disciple is essential to making disciples. So that what a disciple is determines what a disciple does. The question then goes begging. And again, we can work through that. If a disciple is not making disciples, can it truly be said that the person is a disciple? We can debate that. What it certainly, however, can be said is that a disciple who is not making disciples, or a disciple who is not a discipler, is at the very least, living in disobedience. That's how strongly I feel about it. Reading the scriptures in a wholesome way, that is the only conclusion that can be drawn. A disciple is a reproducer, right? So a disciple not only learns and follows, but teaches others to do the same. Just setting the foundation quickly, and then we go and say a bit. But I think it is important that we start here, because I believe if we can make this fundamental mindset shift, then the process really, which can literally be reduced to its lowest common denominator around four essential words, 4 words essentially, which I'll share with us, again, from the life of Jesus. But the mindset shift, I believe, is important, because where we are currently, what certainly from my own perspective, and I believe that is the perspective that is shared by the missions and evangelism department, that we would want the constituent members of the Missionary Church Association in Jamaica, the individual members, if nothing else, to develop a personal, strong, unwavering passion and commitment for making disciples at the personal level. If we get that, then it won't be very long before at the local church level, there is also that fundamental shift away from discipleship as an event and a class to a process, a lifestyle, a culture, if you will. So a disciple is not trained until he's able to do for someone else what you have done for him. We see this in the objective that was clearly set and established by Jesus when he invited these 12 out of the crowd of followers, out of the multitudes of those who followed him or would have heard him teach or watched him do, or witnessed him do miracles. He called them, right? When we amalgamate what the gospel writers have recorded, we learn that he spent all night in prayer on the mountain, and the next day he descended the mountain, and as the crowd gathered around him, out of that crowd, he picked 12, and I love how Mark puts it, that they might be with him, that they might spend time with him, that he might teach them, so that he could send them out to teach others also. And that's a beautiful summary of the process, that they might be with him, spending time with you, I, we, the person who goes forward, whether that person is deeply ready to commit to Christ, or that person simply wants a prayer, as Pastor Wedderburn Ellis said just now, that somebody takes responsibility to spend time with that person, to teach, to intentionally teach that person didactically through lessons and booklets and follow-up material and so on, but also relationally by the transfer of attitudes and worldviews and behaviors, the modeling, the lifestyle that is lived before that person. Because as Dr. John Maxwell says, some things are taught and some things are caught. And that, brethren, is where the fundamental shift needs to be made. The spending time with, the intentionality of spending time with the person who is to be discipled, with the end goal that you're not just hanging out, right? You're not just fellowshipping. That even if and where you are fellowshipping, which is actually very important, having a meal together, hanging out, going out together, doing stuff together, but that ultimately it is done intentionally with the intention of teaching that person, so that that person can, that there is reproduction. And the reproductive cycle of discipleship is not complete until that person that you are discipling is at a place where they are able and ready to go and do the same thing. Whether you're talking about what Jesus did with his disciples, whether you're talking about what the Apostle Paul did with his disciples, his mentee, the Timothys and the Tituses, and the Apollos and the Barnabases. You look through from the Old Testament, Joshua with Jethro with Moses, Moses with Joshua, Elijah with Elisha, David with his band of warriors, right through from Jesus to those who came after him, right down through, there is reproduction. In fact, you and I are followers of Jesus Christ today simply because of the reproductive cycle that is enshrined in and embedded in discipleship. It is to think and operate at the commissioned level, both in Matthew and in Mark and in John, from where we frame the collective of what the Gospels teach about the Great Commission. It is to operate from that position, right? The idea of reproduction. So what then is it? It is the ministry and the process, see that word there again, by which a Christian with a life worth imitating, example, key word there is example, a life worth imitating, commits himself or herself, keyword commitment, to a few individuals. Underline few, I mean, mentally, for now, until you get this in your hand. A few individuals, one to Christ from evangelism, right? See the link between what we call evangelism, yeah? In my mind, actually, Reverend Webster, I see all of it as a continuum. I think it's important, it's an important framework to have. that if sometimes I think when we segregate some of these things, we create problems for ourselves. So if we see evangelism as a whole, as a continuum, where the big tent, the community walk through, the sport ministry, all of those, to get the person to that first base, is really a part of the continuum, right? But I mean, just for our sakes here, that the person won to Christ through that initial action that we consider evangelism, for the purpose of aiding and guiding their spiritual growth toward maturity, and to equip them, edify, to reproduce themselves in a third spiritual generation. So 3 generations. Your disciplee, the person that you are discipling, and the person that your disciplee will then disciple. Paul to Timothy, the same things that you have seen. Timothy had to be with Paul to see, seen, and heard from me. He had to have been with Paul to hear these same things commit thou to faithful brothers and sisters who will be able to teach others also. Same thing, 3 levels, 3 generations. Why did I ask you to underline few? I think I have it further on, but again, let me just drop it in here. Few. Again, the part of the fundamental shift that took place is a movement away from discipleship as an intentional focus on few. Have you ever thought about it that Jesus literally chose only 12? Think about it. Jesus understood a principle about the transfer of values and information, but I want to believe more so values and attitudes. The transfer of spiritual things. He understood something about numbers. He deliberately worked with a few. But we have moved away from that to a model of discipleship that is not grounded in the example of Jesus, but is grounded in modern psychology, modern marketing techniques that suggest that more is more. Whereas Jesus' model is less is more. Dr. John Maxwell puts it this way. Jesus taught the multitude. Matthew 5, he went up to the mountain, and when he was set, the multitudes came unto him, and when he was set, he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, the multitudes followed him. Jesus taught the multitude. He ministered to the many. Yeah, in Luke 4 and 5, he went through the towns and villages, and he healed those who were afflicted with many diseases. He didn't heal the multitude. He certainly didn't just think the thought, and every sick and lame and blind and deaf and dead in Galilee and Judea and Samaria became whole. He didn't do that. He taught the multitude. He ministered to the many, but he mentored or discipled the few. That was deliberate. And as I like to put it, the global kingdom mandate, the global kingdom mandate of the deity, that the glory of God would cover the earth like the waters cover the sea, the glory and the knowledge of God, boiled down to Jesus gathering around himself, discipling a few, 12 out of millions, 12, pouring himself into them inviting them into a relationship, to be with him, to spend time with him. He poured himself into them. He taught them, he gave them instructions, he showed them how to do it. He gave them opportunities to do it themselves. He gave them assessment, provided the experience, and he gave them assessment. Jesus' idea of discipleship, IDEA, I'll come to that in a moment. And that plan of God of global proportions was literally left in the hands of a few quote unquote nondescript men from a little outpost called Galilee. What a risk, or what a calculated master move. It's the latter. Modern ideology says go for mass promotion. And there is a place for that. Right? You know me, you know I'm big on social media and mass media ministry and all of that. But don't get it twisted. Even when we do mass evangelism and mass outreach, it can't be just about the scattershot approach. Your message still should be distilled and should still have a narrow aim and focus and objectives, right? But the modern idea says the larger the crowd, the better you are doing. What did Jesus get? Jesus would have failed that marketing exam because he did not woo the crowd. He did not just think the thought or wave his hand and cause all of Jerusalem and Galilee and Samaria to become his followers and then unleash them on the rest of the world. He crystallized it down by focusing his time, his efforts, his energy on a few, pouring into them, teaching them by word and by precept. And then he says to them, now you go and do what I have done with you. That was the risk, or rather, that was the calculated move. How effective was it? You decide. Spread from Jerusalem to Samaria. The people who came from all over the place to Jerusalem heard them speaking in their languages. After the upper room experience, it spread from there to Asia, then to Europe, and to the rest of the world, and the rest is history. You and I today are aware of the life and ministry of Jesus, and the work continues and will continue until every nation on earth will have heard about the message of Jesus Christ. That's how effective it was. Why then have we abandoned that approach in favor of thinking that all we need to do is get somebody to fill out a card, and then if we do anything else, we put them in a class, get them into the water, and then we pat ourselves on the back and we say, yes, we have done well. We leave the person sink or float, figure it out on your own, make it how you will. Where there is any of the kind of intentional edification, which Jesus through Paul says is the fundamental ministry of the leaders that Jesus gifted to his church. Ephesians chapter 2, Ephesians there, 4, that when he ascended, he gave gifts unto his church. I see some people running with this thing about fivefold ministry and so on and making it about themselves rather than that Jesus gave these gifts to his church for the purpose of building up his people so that all would come to maturity, the maturity of the knowledge of Jesus Christ. That's the government of my presentation, really. The process. We could stop right here, but I think I have maybe a few more minutes, so let's say a few more. So the essential elements, the disciple, that's you, that's me, right? We have received, and so we take the Christian truths that we have received. Then the discipling, the passing on. We pass those on deliberately, intentionally. The reproducing. We create a vision in the minds of those that we are working with, just as Jesus did from the very beginning. Here's how it's expressed differently in another part of the Gospels. Follow me. You, Peter, with your net. You, Andrew, you, come follow me. I want to make you fish for men. That was the vision. Follow me. Why? Because I want you to go and reach people. So we must build a reproductive vision in the disciple. Why are our churches filled with so many bench warmers? Because no one has cast a vision to them of they being a part of reaching others. Why do our churches suffer with a few people at the point of burnout, flabbergasted with the task of doing the work of evangelism and missions? Because the masses, by and large, may never have had anyone cast a vision to them, especially at the beginning, that, hey, yeah, you might have heard about escaping hell. Yeah, you might have heard, however the message was framed when you came. But hey, guess what? This is an active duty engagement. This is an active duty assignment. This is not a conscription to sit at upper camp. This is a conscription that will involve you being trained for deployment. So it is not Christian education. We must not confuse it with Christian education, which is simply, and by Christian education, again, just terminologies and how they tend to be utilized. Rightly done Christian education produces the kind of follows and produces the results of discipleship as Jesus did. Christian education, as it tends to be done now, where people go to a class and there is just the transfer of information, where even the Sunday school teacher, the Sabbath school teacher, the lesson teacher is aloof and disconnected from the lives of those that they are teaching. That's not what it is. It's not bun and cheese. So it must not be confused with fellowship, as I said earlier on. Where there is fellowship, there must be a deliberate intention of passing on. So the New Testament, as I said earlier already, presents us with the need for a paradigm shift. Right? Because generally we tend to want to focus on the many rather than seeing the potential in a single life. If you are to read the biographies or the autobiographies of the missionaries who made tremendous impact, the ones of yesteryear and the ones who are currently, right? You would see that there is some evidence of this. Somebody deliberately taking the time to walk alongside this person. I must pay credit. You won't know the names. You won't know the name Evangelist Graflin Charles. Reverend Webster perhaps would have met him on his trips to Grenada. Right? You won't know a Kenneth Cobham. You won't know a Joseph Harford. You do know a Courtney Richards. These are the men who poured themselves into my life to help me to become who I am and what I am today. So when I talk about this, I'm not talking about some hairy-fairy theoretical stuff. I'm talking about what I've seen done with me and what I've been committed to replicating over the years, and what I ensured became a fundamental part of my pastoral ministry. There was a decisive moment in my ministry at Shalom Missionary Church